Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Setup. Vincent Kane stood in his garage workshop, methodically sharpening a hunting knife. The steady scrape of steel against whetstone had become his meditation over the past 6 months since the divorce was finalized. At 42, Vince had the weathered hands of a man who'd spent 12 years as a Marine Corps sergeant before transitioning to private security work. His ice blue eyes reflected the harsh lessons learned in both war zones and corporate boardrooms. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. The workshop was his sanctuary now, filled with precision tools and tactical equipment that most suburban neighbors would find unsettling. But Maple Grove was the kind of upscale community where people minded their own business, especially when it came to the divorced military veteran who kept to himself. His phone buzzed against the workbench. Lisa's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a photo he should have deleted months ago. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and practiced smile that had once made him believe in second chances. He'd given her plenty of those during their 7-year marriage, each one ending in deeper betrayal. "What do you want, Lisa?" His voice carried the same flat authority that had once commanded respect for Marines under fire. "Vince, I need a favor." Her voice had that artificial sweetness she used when she wanted something. "I know things ended badly between us, but this is about Emma." Emma, the 11-year-old stepdaughter he'd raised as his own until Lisa revealed the truth during their explosive divorce proceedings. Emma wasn't his biological child, a fact Lisa had hidden for 7 years while playing the devoted wife. The revelation had come during her affair with Rick Valdez, a smooth-talking personal trainer who'd been servicing more than just Lisa's fitness routine. "What about Emma?" Vince set down the knife, his instincts already on alert. Lisa never called unless she needed something, and she'd made it clear during the divorce that he was to have no contact with Emma. "I have to go out of town for work, a last-minute conference in Chicago. My usual babysitter fell through, and Rick is—" She paused, and Vince could practically hear her calculating how much to reveal. "Rick's dealing with some family emergency. I know it's asking a lot, but could you watch Emma tonight? Just until tomorrow afternoon." The request was so unexpected that Vince almost laughed. For months, Lisa had painted him as an unstable, potentially dangerous influence on Emma. She'd fought tooth and nail to ensure he had no visitation rights, claiming his military background made him unsuitable around children. Now she was asking him to babysit. "You've got some nerve calling me," he said, but his mind was already working through the angles. Lisa never did anything without multiple layers of motivation. "What's the real reason, Lisa? What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing." "God, Vince, can't you just help without making everything into some conspiracy? Emma asks about you sometimes, you know. She misses you." That hit harder than intended. Despite everything, Emma had been the one bright spot in his marriage to Lisa. The kid was smart, curious, and had looked up to him like he was her real father. Learning the truth about her parentage hadn't changed his feelings toward her. If anything, it made him angrier at Lisa for using Emma as a weapon in their divorce. "Where are you staying in Chicago?" he asked, already knowing he was going to agree. Not out of kindness to Lisa, but because something felt off about this whole situation. "The Marriott downtown. I can text you the details." "I really appreciate this, Vince. I'll drop her off around 6. After hanging up, Vince stared at the knife in his hands. Lisa was playing some kind of game. She always was. The question was whether this was just desperation or something more calculated. Either way, he'd be ready. He spent the next few hours preparing. His small 2-bedroom house was still presentable despite his recent hermit tendencies. He cleared the tactical magazines from the coffee table and locked away the more obvious weapons, though he kept his service pistol close. Old habits died hard. At exactly 6 o'clock, Lisa's silver BMW pulled into his driveway. Emma bounded out first, her dark hair in pigtails and a bright smile on her face that reminded Vince why he'd fallen for the family fantasy in the first place. "Vince!" Emma ran up and hugged him, and for a moment, the anger and cynicism melted away. Whatever games Lisa was playing, Emma was innocent in all of this. Lisa approached more cautiously, dressed in her typical business casual that probably cost more than most people's rent. She'd always been beautiful in a calculated way, the kind of woman who knew exactly how to use her looks to get what she wanted. "Thanks for this," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "I'll be back tomorrow by 3. Emma's been looking forward to seeing you." She handed him Emma's overnight bag and started to leave, then turned back as if remembering something important. "Oh, and Vince, don't take her anywhere tonight, okay? I know you like those hiking trails, but with everything that's happened." She let the implication hang in the air. "Just keep her here, please." The request was odd, but not entirely unreasonable. Vince nodded, already planning to ask Emma about her mother's recent behavior once Lisa left. As the BMW disappeared down the street, Emma looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes that reminded him daily that she wasn't his blood. "So, what do you want to do tonight, kiddo? Can we make pancake for dinner? Mom never lets me have breakfast food for dinner anymore." "Absolutely. But first, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Has your mom been acting strange lately?" Different somehow, Emma's expression shifted, becoming more guarded, a look no 11-year-old should have to master. "She's been on the phone a lot," Emma said quietly, "whispering with Rick, and she's been asking me weird questions about you. Like, what would I do if something bad happened to you, or if you ever tried to take me away somewhere?" Ice formed in Vince's veins. This wasn't a simple babysitting request. This was a setup. Chapter 2, The Trap Springs. The knock came at 7:43 a.m., sharp and authoritative. Vince had been awake for 2 hours, watching the sun rise through his kitchen window, while Emma slept peacefully on the couch. His instincts had kept him alert all night, the certainty that something was wrong growing with each passing hour. Through the peephole, he saw 2 uniformed officers flanked by a detective in a rumpled suit. Behind them stood Lisa, her face a perfect mask of worried mother hysteria. Vince opened the door slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Officers." Vincent Kane, the detective stepped forward, badge displayed. "Detective Rodriguez, Maple Grove PD. We need to talk to you about Emma Hartwell." "She's right here, safe and asleep," Vince said calmly. "Her mother asked me to watch her overnight." "That's not what her mother told us," Rodriguez replied, his hand resting casually near his service weapon. "Mrs. Hartwell reported that you took Emma without permission yesterday evening. She's filing kidnapping charges." The accusation hung in the air like a lit fuse. Vince felt the familiar cold clarity that had kept him alive in Afghanistan wash over him. This was an ambush, carefully orchestrated. "Lisa," he called over the detective's shoulder, his voice carrying across the small front yard. "You want to explain to these officers how you called me yesterday, begged me to watch Emma, and personally dropped her off?" Lisa stepped forward, and Vince had to admire her performance. Tears streamed down her face, her voice shaking with perfectly calibrated maternal anguish. "That's not what happened. I came home from work yesterday, and Emma was gone. When I called you, you said you'd taken her to teach me a lesson about the divorce. You said," her voice broke dramatically, "you said I'd never see her again if I didn't drop the custody restrictions." It was masterful in its simplicity, his word against hers, and she'd chosen the narrative carefully. The bitter ex-husband with military training taking revenge through the child. Detective Rodriguez was already looking at Vince like he was a confirmed threat. "Sir, I need you to step outside so we can talk about this properly," Rodriguez said, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Vince moved toward the door, Emma appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The sight of the police officers made her freeze. "What's happening?" Emma's voice was small and confused. "Emma, baby, come here," Lisa called out, extending her arms. "Mommy's here now. You're safe." But Emma didn't move toward her mother. Instead, she looked at Vince with a strange intensity, then back at Lisa. "Mom, why are you lying?" Emma's voice carried across the morning air with startling clarity. The detective's hand moved away from his weapon. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Emma walked to Vince's side, reaching into the small purse she always carried, a gift from her grandmother that Lisa had never been able to convince her to abandon. "Mom called Vince yesterday and asked him to watch me." I heard the whole conversation. Emma pulled out her phone, the latest iPhone that Lisa had bought to assuage her guilt over the divorce. I recorded it because Mom's been acting weird lately, and Vince taught me to always gather evidence when adults are being confusing. She held up the phone to Detective Rodriguez. Do you want to hear it? The color drained from Lisa's face as Emma pressed play. Her own voice filled the morning air, crystal clear through the phone speakers. Vince, I need a favor. I know things ended badly between us, but this is about Emma. I have to go out of town for work, a last-minute conference in Chicago. My usual babysitter fell through, and Rick is dealing with some family emergency. Could you watch Emma tonight? Just until tomorrow afternoon. The recording continued, capturing the entire conversation, including Lisa's specific request that Vince not take Emma anywhere. Detective Rodriguez looked from the phone to Lisa, his expression shifting from suspicion of Vince to something much colder. Ma'am, you want to explain why your story doesn't match what we just heard? Lisa's carefully constructed facade began to crack. That's not. Emma must have edited it somehow. Kids know how to do that with apps now. Mom, why are you lying? Emma repeated, her voice stronger now. And why didn't you come home last night? I called you 3 times, and you never answered. Ma'am, Detective Rodriguez said, his tone now carrying official weight. Filing a false police report is a felony. I think we need to have a more detailed conversation about what's really going on here. As the officers escorted Lisa toward their patrol car for questioning, she turned back toward Vince with a look of pure venom that revealed her true nature, the mask finally slipping completely. This isn't over, she hissed. Emma slipped her small hand into Vince's much larger one. I'm sorry, Vince. I know Mom's been planning something bad. She and Rick have been whispering about you for weeks. Vince squeezed her hand gently, his mind already working through the implications. This had been a test run, a probe to see if they could frame him for something more serious. The question was, what were Lisa and Rick really after? But as he looked down at Emma's upturned face, one thing became crystal clear. They made a fatal mistake involving her in their schemes. And Vince never forgave anyone who threatened the people he cared about. The war between him and Lisa was about to escalate, and she had no idea what kind of enemy she'd just made. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Web. Within hours of Lisa's humiliating arrest for filing a false report, Vince's phone started ringing. First, it was Lisa's lawyer, demanding Emma be turned over to Rick Valdez as her emergency guardian. Then came the threatening calls from numbers he didn't recognize, promising legal hell and worse if he didn't stay in his lane. But Vince Kane hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by backing down from threats. While Emma watched cartoons in his living room, he made his own calls to people Lisa couldn't imagine existed in her suburban world. Tommy Tank Morrison answered on the first ring. The former Marine had transitioned from military service to private investigation, specializing in the kind of background checks that went deeper than most people's comfort zones. Vince heard through the grapevine you're having domestic troubles. Tank's gravelly voice carried the weight of shared combat experience. What do you need? Full workup on Lisa Hartwell and Rick Valdez. Financial records, phone logs, travel history, everything going back 6 months. And Tank, I need to know what they're really after. Roger that. Give me 48 hours. Next, Vince called his lawyer, David Chun, one of the few people who'd seen through Lisa's act during the divorce proceedings. Chun had warned him that Lisa's sudden cooperation in finalizing the divorce had been suspicious. Vince, I heard about this morning's incident, Chun said without preamble. Are you and Emma safe? For now. But David, I need you to file for emergency custody of Emma. Whatever Lisa's planning, she's using Emma as bait, and I won't let that continue. Based on today's events, I think we have a strong case. But Vince, you need to know, Lisa's been busy since the divorce. She filed 3 separate complaints with Child Protective Services alleging you were mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to Emma. They were all dismissed for lack of evidence, but it establishes a pattern for her narrative, Vince finished. She's been building a case against me for months. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Vince found himself studying the recorded conversation she'd captured. Something about the timing bothered him. He replayed it several times before realizing what had caught his attention. Background noise during Lisa's call. Using audio software he'd learned in his security consulting work, Vince isolated and enhanced the background sounds. There, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of Rick's voice, coaching Lisa on what to say. Tell him about the conference. No, make it sound more urgent. Remember, we need him isolated with her overnight. They'd planned this entire scenario, but why? What was the end game that required him to be alone with Emma overnight? The answer came the next morning with Tank's preliminary report. Your ex-wife's broke, Vince. Completely tapped out. Tank's voice was grim over the secure phone line. She's been living off credit cards and loans since the divorce, burning through what was left of her inheritance. But here's the interesting part. She took out a $2 million life insurance policy on you 6 months ago, listing herself as the beneficiary. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. She was setting me up to be killed while supposedly kidnapping Emma. Gets worse. Rick Valdez isn't just her boy toy. He's got connections to some serious people. Drug runners, enforcers, the kind of guys who make problems disappear for the right price. My source says Rick owed money to some very dangerous people, and suddenly he's flush with cash as of last week. Vince felt the familiar ice-cold fury that had made him effective in combat. They were going to have me killed and make it look like a kidnapping gone wrong. Lisa collects the insurance money, Rick pays off his debts, and Emma becomes collateral damage. That's my read. But Vince, there's more. Emma's trust fund from her grandmother, the one Lisa can't touch until Emma turns 18, it's worth $1.8 million. If something happened to Emma while in your care, Lisa would inherit everything as the grieving mother. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Lisa hadn't just been planning to frame him. She'd been willing to sacrifice Emma for money. Her own daughter. That night, as Emma helped him make dinner, Vince watched her carefully. She was too perceptive for her own good, already sensing the undercurrents of danger around her. Vince, she said quietly while chopping vegetables with a precision that reminded him of his own training and attention to detail. I found something else. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind used for school projects. I've been recording Mom and Rick when they think I'm asleep or in my room. I know I shouldn't spy, but she looked up at him with those intelligent eyes. I was scared. Vince knelt down to her level. You did exactly the right thing, kiddo. Sometimes adults do bad things, and it's important to protect yourself. Can I listen to what you recorded? The recordings painted a picture of casual cruelty that made Vince's blood boil. Lisa and Rick discussing Emma like she was an obstacle to be removed, debating whether the accident should happen before or after Vince's suicide from guilt. They talked about her inheritance like it was already theirs, planning trips to Europe and a new house once the situation was resolved. In one particularly chilling exchange, Lisa laughed about how easy it had been to manipulate Emma's emotions during the divorce, making her believe that Vince didn't want to see her anymore. The kid's so desperate for a father figure, she'll believe whatever we tell her. Lisa's voice was cold and calculating on the recording. Once Vince is gone, we'll ship her off to boarding school. Problem solved. Emma sat quietly through the entire playback, her small face pale but determined. They're bad people, aren't they? She asked when it finished. Yes, kiddo, they are. But here's what we're going to do about it. As Vince outlined his plan, he saw something in Emma's eyes that reminded him of himself at that age. A hardness born from necessity, a recognition that sometimes the world required you to fight dirty to survive. Lisa and Rick had made the mistake of underestimating both him and Emma. They'd assumed he was just another suburban ex-husband to be manipulated and discarded. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. 3 days later, Lisa sat in the law offices of Preston and Associates, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on the mahogany conference table. The false report charges had been dropped thanks to an expensive lawyer and her convincing performance as a confused, worried mother who'd misunderstood the situation. But Emma remained with Vince pending a custody hearing, and every day that passed meant more money bleeding from Lisa's rapidly depleting accounts. Mrs. Hartwell, her lawyer, Gerald Preston, looked uncomfortable as he reviewed the latest filings. Mr. Kane's attorney has submitted some concerning evidence. Recorded conversations, financial records, phone logs that suggest. Suggest what? Lisa's voice carried the sharp edge that emerged when her careful facade slipped. That you may have been planning to harm your ex-husband. And possibly Emma. Lisa's laugh was perfectly calibrated, shocked, hurt, and just vulnerable enough to seem authentic. Gerald, you can't seriously believe Vince's paranoid fantasies. The man's obviously having some kind of breakdown. The military did things to him, you know, PTSD or whatever they call it. But even as she spoke, Lisa's mind was racing through contingencies. Vince was proving more resilient than anticipated, and Rick's contacts were getting impatient about their money. The original plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Now everything was falling apart. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rick. We need to meet. Tonight. Warehouse District. Come alone. The warehouse Rick had chosen sat in the industrial section of town, where security cameras were sparse and questionable activities could proceed without interruption. Lisa arrived at midnight, her BMW looking out of place among the loading docks and rusted shipping containers. Rick was waiting inside, but he wasn't alone. Two men stood in the shadows, expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the predatory stillness of professional killers. Lisa, meet Mr. Torino and Mr. Santos. Rick's usual smooth confidence had been replaced by nervous energy. They're here about our debt situation. Torino stepped forward, a thin man with dead eyes who looked like he managed middle-class suburban lives rather than organized crime debts. Ms. Hartwell, your boyfriend borrowed $200,000 from our organization 6 months ago. The terms were very clear. Rick told me he'd handled that, Lisa said, though she was beginning to understand that Rick had been lying about more than she'd realized. The interest has compounded, Santos added, his voice carrying a slight accent that made each word sound like a threat. Total owed is now $400,000. Payment was due last week. Lisa felt the trap closing around her. The insurance money will. There is no insurance money, Torino interrupted. Your plan failed. Mr. Kane is very much alive, and our sources tell us he's become quite interested in your activities. The police involvement has made our organization uncomfortable. Rick stepped forward desperately. We can still make this work. Vince has Emma, right? We grab the kid, make it look like he took her and ran. Then we arrange an accident for both of them. Lisa gets the inheritance. We pay you back. Everybody wins. The casual way Rick discussed murdering an 11-year-old child sent ice through Lisa's veins. She'd been willing to sacrifice Emma for money, but hearing it spelled out so bluntly made her realize how far she'd fallen. There's a problem with that plan, Torino said quietly. From the shadows stepped Vincent Kane, moving with the silent precision of a hunter who'd been stalking his prey. Behind him came Tank Morrison and two other men who had the unmistakable bearing of military specialists. The problem, Vince continued, his voice carrying deadly calm, is that you're all under surveillance. Have been for the past 72 hours. Rick reached for something inside his jacket, but Santos was faster, pressing a pistol against his temple. I wouldn't, Santos advised. Mr. Torino and I have been having very interesting conversations with Mr. Kane about your actual debt situation. Lisa's world tilted sideways. What? Torino smiled without warmth. Your boyfriend has been using our money to live above his means while lying to you about his connections. The debt is real, but Rick's claims about having muscle for hire? Fantasy. He owes money to loan sharks, not the organized crime syndicate he pretended to represent. Tank Morrison stepped into the light, holding a tablet that displayed financial records. Rick's been running 3 different cons simultaneously. He borrowed money, claiming he had a rich girlfriend who'd pay it back, while telling you he had dangerous connections who'd solve your Vince problem. Meanwhile, he's been skimming from your accounts to pay gambling debts in Atlantic City. The scope of the deception was staggering. Lisa had thought she was manipulating Rick, while he'd been manipulating her. And now they were both trapped in a web that Vince had somehow taken control of. Here's what's going to happen, Vince said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd commanded Marines in life-or-death situations. Lisa, you're going to sign over full custody of Emma to me. Rick, you're going to disappear permanently. And both of you are going to ensure that certain recordings never see the light of day. Lisa found her voice. What recordings? Emma stepped out from behind Tank, holding the same digital recorder she'd shown Vince. But now she wore a small wireless microphone that connected to a recording device in Tank's possession. All of it, Emma said quietly. Planning to kill Vince, talking about my inheritance, discussing how to make my death look like an accident. Everything. The little girl Lisa had dismissed as a pawn had been actively gathering evidence against her for weeks. Emma, sweetheart. Lisa tried to summon her manipulative maternal voice, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand that you are going to kill me for money, Emma replied with devastating simplicity. I understand that you never loved me, just what I was worth. And I understand that Vince is the only family I have left. Rick made a desperate lunge toward Emma, perhaps thinking he could take a hostage and negotiate his way out. He managed exactly 2 steps before Vince's training took over. The former Marine moved with economical precision, dropping Rick with a combination that sent him sprawling unconscious across the warehouse floor. The entire confrontation lasted less than 3 seconds. As I was saying, Vince continued as if nothing had happened. Here's what's going to happen. Lisa realized she was looking at a man who'd spent years learning how to eliminate threats efficiently and permanently. The suburban ex-husband facade had been just that, a facade. Underneath was someone far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. And she just threatened the one person in the world he decided to protect. Chapter 5. The Price of Betrayal. The custody hearing 3 weeks later was a formality. Lisa sat at the defendant's table, her expensive clothes unable to hide the hollow look that had taken residence in her eyes since the warehouse confrontation. Across the aisle, Emma sat between Vince and his lawyer, occasionally glancing at her biological mother with something that might have been pity. Judge Maria Santos, no relation to the loan shark, reviewed the evidence with a methodical precision that had made her reputation in family court. The recordings Emma had made, the financial records showing Lisa's desperate schemes, the testimony from Detective Rodriguez about the false kidnapping report. It painted a picture of a woman who'd been willing to sacrifice her own child for money. Mrs. Hartwell, Judge Santos addressed Lisa directly. In 23 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated betrayal of parental responsibility. The evidence suggests you were not only willing to endanger your daughter's life, but actively planning to profit from her death. Lisa's lawyer, a court-appointed attorney, since she could no longer afford Preston's services, made a half-hearted attempt at damage control. Your Honor, my client was under extreme financial stress and may have made poor decisions, but poor decisions? Judge Santos' voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Conspiring to murder the man who raised this child and potentially harming Emma herself goes far beyond poor decisions. This represents a fundamental unfitness for parenthood. The judge turned to Emma, her expression softening. Young lady, you've shown remarkable courage and intelligence throughout this ordeal. The court recognizes that you've expressed a clear preference for living with Mr. Kane, and given the circumstances, that arrangement will be made permanent. As the gavel came down, Emma quietly reached over and squeezed Vince's hand. Lisa made no attempt to approach them as they left the courtroom. But Vince's justice was far from complete. That evening, he sat in his workshop cleaning his service pistol while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. The routine had become comfortable over the past month. 2 people who'd found family in each other despite the chaos around them. Tank Morrison's latest report lay open on the workbench, detailing Rick Valdez's current situation. After the warehouse confrontation, Rick had indeed disappeared, but not in the way he'd intended. The real loan sharks he owed money to had tracked him down in a cheap motel outside the city. According to Tank sources, Rick's gambling debts had caught up with him in a particularly unforgiving way. Problem solved itself, Tank had noted in his typically understated manner. Lisa's situation required more finesse. Simply having her arrested for the conspiracy would mean years of court battles, appeals, and the possibility that some expensive lawyer might find technicalities to exploit. Vince preferred more permanent solutions. The financial records tank had uncovered showed Lisa's debts ran far deeper than even she realized. Credit cards, personal loans, second mortgage on her house that she'd hidden from her divorce attorney. She was leveraged to the point where bankruptcy was inevitable. But Vince had no intention of letting her escape through legal bankruptcy proceedings. Over the next 6 months, Lisa experienced a series of unfortunate financial coincidences. Her credit cards were suddenly called in for full payment due to irregularities in her account activity. The bank discovered that her mortgage application had contained false information and demanded immediate repayment. Her car was repossessed when payments mysteriously failed to process despite her bank account showing sufficient funds. Each incident could be explained by computer glitches, administrative errors, or simple bad luck. But the cumulative effect drove Lisa from her suburban house to a cramped apartment, then to a room above a convenience store in the worst part of town. Vince watched it all unfold with the patience of a sniper. Every phone call to collection agencies, every desperate attempt to find employment that paid enough to service her debts, every small humiliation as her middle-class life disintegrated. He monitored it all through resources Lisa couldn't imagine existed. The final stroke came when Lisa applied for a job at a high-end retail store, hoping her looks and sales experience would translate into enough income to stabilize her situation. The manager seemed interested until the background check revealed that Lisa Hartwell had been flagged in a database used by security companies, a database that noted her as a person of interest in insurance fraud investigations. The flag had been placed by a security consultant who specialized in financial crimes. A consultant who happened to be Vincent Kane. Emma, meanwhile, flourished in her new life. Her grades improved dramatically. She joined the school's robotics club and began taking martial arts classes that Vince suggested might be useful for a young woman to know. She never asked about her mother, though Vince knew she was aware that Lisa's life had taken a dramatic downturn. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Emma looked up from the vegetables she was cutting with practiced precision. "Vince, do you think Mom knows you're the reason her life fell apart?" The question was asked with the casual directness that had become Emma's trademark since the custody battle. Vince paused in his own food preparation, considering how to answer. He'd never lied to Emma, and he wasn't about to start now. "I think she probably suspects," he said carefully, "but proving it would be impossible. Everything that's happened to her can be explained by her own poor choices catching up with her." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Good. She deserves it." The cold satisfaction in Emma's voice would have been disturbing coming from most 11-year-olds. But Emma had been forced to grow up quickly, to understand that the world contained people who would hurt her for money, and that sometimes justice required taking matters into your own hands. "Emma," Vince said gently, "what your mother did was unforgivable. But the anger you're carrying, that can poison you if you let it. I dealt with her because she threatened you, but I don't want you to become someone who only knows how to solve problems through revenge." Emma considered this while continuing to work on dinner preparation. "I understand, but I'm glad she's paying for what she did. And I'm glad I have you now instead of her." That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her room, surrounded by books and science projects, Vince received a text from an unknown number. "I know what you did. We need to talk." It was signed L. Lisa wasn't done fighting. But then again, neither was Vince. Chapter 6. Cornered Prey. Lisa Hartwell stood in the alley behind Murphy's Diner, her designer clothes from 6 months ago replaced by thrift store bargains that hung loose on her diminishing frame. The steady erosion of her life had carved away the soft edges, revealing the desperate core that had always driven her decisions. The phone in her hand contained her last gambit, photos taken with a telephoto lens of Vince and Emma together, along with documentation of every financial disaster that had befallen her since the custody hearing. She'd spent her last $200 hiring a private investigator to trace the mysterious computer glitches and administrative errors that had destroyed her credit. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence, and she'd finally found a thread that connected back to Vincent Kane's security consulting business. When Vince emerged from the shadows at exactly midnight, Lisa felt a moment of satisfaction at the wariness in his movements. For once, she had something he needed to worry about. "You look like hell, Lisa," Vince observed, his voice carrying neither sympathy nor satisfaction, just the flat assessment of someone evaluating a potential threat. "Your handiwork," she replied, holding up the folder of evidence she'd compiled. "Very thorough, very careful, but not perfect." Vince stepped closer, and Lisa forced herself not to retreat. Even diminished by poverty and stress, she was still dangerous when cornered. More dangerous, perhaps, because she had nothing left to lose. "What do you want?" he asked. "Justice," Lisa said, then laughed bitterly at her own word choice. "Or maybe just revenge. I haven't decided yet." She opened the folder, spreading photos across the diner's dumpster lid. Images of Vince teaching Emma to shoot at a private range. Documents showing his consulting company's access to credit reporting systems. Financial records proving he had the means and opportunity to orchestrate her destruction. "Interesting hobby for a man raising an 11-year-old girl," Lisa said, tapping the shooting range photos. "I wonder what Child Protective Services would think about you training Emma to use firearms. Or what they'd think about your systematic campaign to destroy her biological mother." Vince studied the photos without expression. "You're fishing, Lisa. You have suspicions, but no proof that would hold up in court." "Maybe, but I don't need court-quality proof. I just need enough to raise questions about your fitness as Emma's guardian. One anonymous tip to CPS about your weapons training with a minor, combined with evidence that you've been stalking your ex-wife." She shrugged. "At minimum, it opens an investigation that could drag on for months." The threat was real, and they both knew it. Family courts erred on the side of caution when it came to child welfare, and even unfounded accusations could trigger lengthy investigations that would disrupt Emma's stability. "What do you want?" Vince repeated, his tone suggesting he was considering more direct solutions to the problem Lisa represented. "I want my life back," Lisa said. "I want the financial harassment to stop. I want a clean slate and enough money to disappear quietly. Consider it a divorce settlement that should have happened 6 months ago." "How much?" $500,000. "Clean bills. No traceable transactions. In exchange, I disappear forever. Emma never sees me again, and neither do you." Vince was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind working through options. Lisa could practically see him calculating odds and outcomes, weighing the cost of paying her off against the risk of letting her continue to be a threat. "I need time to arrange that kind of cash," he said finally. "You have 48 hours. After that, I start making phone calls." Lisa gathered her photos and documents, feeling a surge of the old confidence that had once made her believe she could manipulate anyone. "Oh, and Vince? Don't even think about trying to eliminate me the way you did, Rick. I've made arrangements that ensure my evidence gets released if anything happens to me." She turned to leave, then paused. "You know what the funny thing is? I actually loved Emma in my own way. But you turned her against me so completely that she looks at me like I'm something toxic. You turned her against you when you planned to murder her for inheritance money," Vince replied quietly. "I just made sure she survived long enough to understand what kind of person you really are." Lisa walked away without another word, disappearing into the urban decay that had become her new environment. But she felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in months. Finally, she had leverage again. What Lisa didn't see was Emma stepping out from behind the diner's back in trance, her small form having moved with the silent precision Vince had been teaching her. The girl had followed him despite his instructions to stay home, using skills he'd taught her for self-protection. Emma had heard every word of the conversation, and her young face held an expression that was far too cold for someone her age. "She's never going to stop, is she?" Emma asked quietly. Vince looked down at the girl who'd become his daughter in every way that mattered. "No, people like Lisa don't stop. They just find new ways to be destructive." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to stop her permanently." The casual way Emma discussed ending a human threat should have alarmed Vince. Instead, he felt a grim pride at how thoroughly she'd learned the lessons about survival he'd been teaching her. "Emma, what we're talking about. I know exactly what we're talking about," Emma interrupted. "And I know you've been protecting me from having to make this choice. But she's my biological mother. If anyone has the right to decide her fate, it's me." Vince stared down at Emma, seeing himself reflected in her determined expression. Lisa had created a situation where the only solution was permanent, and Emma understood that better than most adults would. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Emma pulled out her phone, displaying a recording app that had been running throughout the entire conversation with Lisa. "I want to give her exactly what she deserves," Emma said. "And I want to make sure she can never threaten our family again." As they walked back toward Vince's truck, Emma began outlining a plan that combined her innocent appearance with Vince's tactical expertise and Lisa's own desperate greed. It was going to be perfect. Chapter 7, The Final Game. 2 nights later, Lisa sat in her cramped studio apartment above the convenience store, counting the hours until her 48-hour deadline expired. She'd spent the time refining her backup plans and ensuring her evidence was properly distributed to trigger automatically if Vince tried anything clever. The knock on her door came at exactly 11 p.m. Through the peephole, she saw Emma standing alone in the dingy hallway, wearing a simple dress and carrying a small backpack. The sight of her daughter, former daughter, Lisa corrected herself, sent a complex mix of emotions through her chest. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Lisa opened the door cautiously, scanning the hallway for signs of Vince. "I came to talk to you," Emma said quietly. "Alone. Vince doesn't know I'm here." Lisa's maternal instincts, dormant for months, stirred weakly. Despite everything that had happened, Emma was still an 11-year-old child standing in a dangerous neighborhood at night. "Come in, quickly," Lisa said, pulling Emma inside and locking the door behind her. The apartment was a stark reminder of how far Lisa had fallen. A fold-out bed, a hot plate, and a table that served as both desk and dining surface comprised the entire living space. Emma looked around with the observational skills Vince had taught her. "This is where you live now?" Emma asked. "Temporarily," Lisa said, defensive about her reduced circumstances. "Just until I get back on my feet." Emma nodded seriously. "I heard you talking to Vince the other night." "I followed him." Lisa's attention sharpened. "You heard our conversation?" "All of it. About the money you want, the photos you took, your plan to call Child Protective Services." Emma reached in her backpack and pulled out an envelope. "I brought you something." Lisa opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photographs of Vince teaching Emma to use firearms, but also newer pictures that showed Emma herself demonstrating advanced combat techniques with a competence that was disturbing in someone her age. "Where did you get these?" Lisa asked. "I took them," Emma said simply. "Vince has been training me to protect myself, but he's also been teaching me things that—" She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Things that might worry social workers if they knew about it." Lisa felt a surge of hope. If Emma was turning against Vince, providing evidence of inappropriate training methods, then maybe Lisa could salvage this situation and regain custody. "Emma, sweetheart, if Vince has been doing things that make you uncomfortable—" "He hasn't," Emma interrupted. "I love learning from him. I love being strong enough to protect myself. But I also understand what would happen if the wrong people found out about it." Emma pulled a digital recorder from her backpack, the same device she'd used to capture Lisa's conspiracy with Rick months earlier. "This contains recordings of everything Vince has taught me. Combat techniques, weapons training, surveillance methods. Enough to prove he's been turning me into something that social workers would consider dangerous." Lisa's heart raced as she realized the implications. "Emma, why are you showing me this?" "Because I want to make a deal," Emma said, her young voice carrying a calculating tone that reminded Lisa of her own manipulative techniques. "You want money and a clean slate. I want something too. What do you want?" Emma's expression hardened into something that looked disturbingly adult. "I want you to disappear forever. Not just from our lives, but completely. I want you to take Vince's money and go somewhere we'll never have to worry about you again. And if I don't," Emma held up the recorder, "then I give this to the authorities and tell them that you've been trying to manipulate me into providing evidence against my guardian. I'll say you've been stalking us, taking unauthorized photos, and trying to turn me against the man who saved me from your murder plot. The reversal was so complete that Lisa felt dizzy. Her own daughter was blackmailing her using techniques Lisa herself had taught through years of manipulation and schemes. Emma, you're 11 years old. You can't possibly understand. I understand that you tried to have me killed for money, Emma said with devastating clarity. I understand that you never loved me, just what I was worth. And I understand that you're never going to stop being a threat to the only real family I've ever had. Lisa stared at this child who spoke with the cold calculation of an adult predator. What happened to you? What did he turn you into? He turned me into someone who can't be victimized, Emma replied. Someone who won't let people hurt the people I love. Someone who deals with threats permanently. The implications of that last word hung in the air between them. You're threatening me, Lisa said, barely believing the situation. I'm giving you a choice, Emma corrected. Take the money, disappear, and live whatever life you can build somewhere else. Or refuse, and discover that you're not the only one in this family who knows how to eliminate problems. Lisa looked into Emma's eyes and saw something that chilled her to the bone. This wasn't a child making empty threats. This was someone who had been thoroughly trained by a man who'd learned problem-solving in military combat zones. How much money? Lisa asked quietly. Emma smiled, and for a moment she looked like the innocent child she should have been. 500,000, just like you asked for. Vince agreed it was a reasonable price to ensure our family's safety. And if I take it, you disappear. New identity, new life, whatever you want. But if you ever come back, if you ever try to contact me or Vince again, if you ever represent any kind of threat to our family. Emma's voice trailed off, leaving the consequence unspoken, but clearly understood. Lisa realized she was looking at the end result of her own choices. She created a situation where her own daughter had learned to view her as an enemy, to be neutralized rather than a mother to be loved. When? Lisa asked. Tomorrow night. Bring everything, all your evidence, all your backup plans, everything you've compiled against us. We'll make the exchange, and then you'll have exactly 24 hours to be out of the state. Emma stood to leave, then turned back with an expression that managed to be both childlike and terrifying. Mom, I want you to know something. I don't hate you for what you tried to do to me. I understand that you're just someone who never learned how to love anything more than money. But I do love Vince, and I love the life we've built together. And I'll do anything to protect that. After Emma left, Lisa sat in her empty apartment, understanding that she'd lost more than custody, more than money, more than her comfortable suburban life. She'd lost the last person in the world who might have loved her despite her flaws. And she'd turned that person into someone capable of destroying her completely. Chapter 8. Blood and Money. The abandoned warehouse in the industrial district looked like a setting designed for final confrontations. Lisa arrived at midnight carrying a duffel bag containing every piece of evidence she compiled against Vince, every photograph, every document, every backup plan she'd created over the past months. Emma was waiting alone in the center of the vast space, a small figure dwarfed by the shadows and rusted machinery that surrounded her. A metal briefcase sat on a folding table beside her. You came, Emma said as Lisa approached. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might try something clever. Most desperate people do. Emma gestured to the briefcase. $500,000, just as promised. Small bills, non-sequential, completely untraceable. Lisa set down her duffel bag and opened the briefcase. The money was real. More cash than she'd seen in one place since her inheritance had been depleted. Enough to disappear completely and start over somewhere Vince Kane would never find her. Everything's in the bag, Lisa said. Photos, recordings, documents, contact information for the private investigator I hired. All my insurance policies in case something happened to me. Emma picked up the bag and began methodically removing items, checking each piece of evidence against a list she pulled from her pocket. Very thorough, Emma said approvingly. Just like Vince taught me to be. Where is he? Lisa asked, scanning the shadows for signs of the man who'd orchestrated her destruction. Close enough, Emma replied without looking up from her inventory. But this is between you and me. Mother to daughter. Former mother to daughter, I suppose. The correction carried a finality that made Lisa's chest tighten. Emma, I know you hate me now, but I want you to understand. You want me to understand that you loved me in your own way, Emma interrupted. That the money and the insurance policies and the murder plots were just desperation, not who you really are inside. Lisa nodded, surprised by Emma's perceptiveness. But here's what I understand, Emma continued, her voice carrying a coldness that belonged on someone decades older. You had a choice when Vince left you. You could have focused on being a good mother to me, building a life based on what we meant to each other. Instead, you chose to see me as a financial asset to be leveraged. Emma finished her inventory and zipped the duffel bag closed. Every single decision you made after the divorce was about money. The only reason you kept me around was because you couldn't access my trust fund without me. The only reason you plotted to kill Vince was because you needed insurance money. Even now, the only reason you're walking away is because we're paying you to leave. The analysis was devastatingly accurate, delivered with the dispassionate precision of someone who'd learned to evaluate threats objectively. You were my daughter, Lisa said weakly. I did love you. No, Emma replied. You loved what I represented. Security, money, status as a mother. But you never loved me as a person because you never took the time to know who I was as a person. Emma pulled out her phone and showed Lisa a recording app that had been running throughout their conversation. This conversation has been recorded and transmitted to Vince in real time, Emma said. Insurance, in case you were planning one final betrayal. But it's also documentation of our agreement. Lisa stared at the phone, realizing that even this final negotiation had been controlled by people who thought several steps ahead of her. You learned well from him, Lisa said. I learned that people who love you protect you, Emma replied, and that people who threaten your family need to be dealt with permanently. Something in Emma's tone made Lisa step backward. Emma, we have an agreement. I'm taking the money and leaving. You said. I said you had a choice, Emma corrected. Take the money and disappear, or refuse and face the consequences. But I never said those were the only two possible outcomes. From the shadows surrounding the warehouse came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Vince emerged into the light, but he wasn't alone. Tank Morrison and two other men flanked him, their postures suggesting this was more than a simple money exchange. Lisa, Vince said conversationally, do you remember what I told you about forgiveness? Lisa's blood turned to ice as she recalled his words from months earlier. He never forgave anyone who threatened the people he cared about. We had a deal, Lisa said, backing toward the warehouse entrance. We had an agreement based on your assumption that you were negotiating from a position of strength, Vince replied. But the truth is, you stopped being a threat the moment Emma decided you were more valuable as an object lesson than as a living problem. Lisa looked frantically between Emma and Vince, understanding that she'd walked into something far more sophisticated than a simple extortion payoff. Emma, please, Lisa tried appealing to whatever maternal connection might still exist. I'm your mother. Emma's expression didn't change. My mother died the day she decided to murder me for money. You're just someone who used to live in her body. The men began closing in from multiple directions, moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd done this before. The money, Lisa started, will be donated to children's charities, Emma said matter-of-factly. Specifically, organizations that help kids who've been abused by their parents. I thought that was appropriate. Lisa made a desperate run for the entrance, but Tank Morrison was already blocking her path. She spun around, looking for another exit, but found herself surrounded by people who viewed her elimination as a simple tactical problem to be solved. You're going to murder me, Lisa said, the reality finally sinking in. We're going to solve a problem, Vince corrected. You've demonstrated repeatedly that you'll never stop being a threat. To Emma, to our family, to innocent people you might manipulate in the future. This is just the logical conclusion of choices you made months ago. Emma walked over to Lisa, looking up at her with eyes that held no emotion whatsoever. I want you to know that I'm not doing this out of anger or revenge, Emma said quietly. I'm doing this because it's necessary. Because some problems can't be solved any other way. Because people like you don't change, they just find new ways to hurt people. Lisa fell to her knees, finally understanding that her 11-year-old daughter had become someone capable of ordering her execution with the same casual efficiency most children use to choose breakfast cereal. "Emma, please." "Goodbye, Lisa," Emma said, turning away as Tank Morrison stepped forward with the mechanical precision of someone completing a routine task. The last thing Lisa Hartwell heard was her daughter's voice, speaking to Vince with the tone of someone discussing weekend plans. "Can we get ice cream on the way home? I think I've earned it." Chapter 9. Family. 6 months later, Emma Kane sat in her new bedroom, putting the finishing touches on a science project about forensic evidence analysis. At 12, she'd grown taller and carried herself with the confident posture of someone who'd never again worry about being victimized by the adults in her life. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, making her transformation from Emma Hartwell to Emma Kane legally official. The judge had commented on what a remarkable young woman she was, how mature and well-adjusted she seemed despite the tragedy of losing her biological mother in a car accident that had occurred while Lisa was fleeing the state. Vince knocked on her doorframe, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "How's the project coming?" "Almost finished," Emma said, accepting the cup and making space for him on her bed. "Mrs. Patterson says it's graduate-level work, but I think she's just being nice." Mrs. Patterson is a former FBI forensic analyst. If she says it's graduate-level work, then it probably is. Vince examined the detailed charts and analysis Emma had prepared. "You thinking about law enforcement for a career?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Maybe. Or maybe private security like you. I like the idea of protecting people who can't protect themselves." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, looking out Emma's window at the suburban neighborhood where they'd built their new life. To outside observers, they were simply a devoted father and daughter who'd overcome tragedy together. "Any regrets?" Vince asked quietly. Emma knew he wasn't asking about her science project or her career plans. He was asking about Lisa, about the choices they'd made in that warehouse, about the line they'd crossed together. "No," Emma said without hesitation. "She would have kept coming back. She would have kept trying to hurt us, or use us, or manipulate us. Some problems don't have nice solutions." Vince nodded, recognizing his own pragmatic worldview reflected in Emma's reasoning. "You know that what we did, what I taught you to do, it changes you. There's no going back to being someone who doesn't know how to solve problems permanently." "I know," Emma said, "but I also know that I never want to be helpless again. I never want to be someone who gets victimized because they're too naive or too weak to fight back." She leaned against Vince's shoulder, still young enough to seek comfort from her father figure despite the adult nature of their conversation. "Do you think I'm broken?" Emma asked. "Because I don't feel guilty about what happened to her." Vince was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer honestly without damaging the remarkable young woman Emma was becoming. "I think you're someone who learned early that the world contains people who will hurt you if you let them," he said finally. "I think you're someone who decided to be strong enough to protect yourself and the people you love. Whether that makes you broken or just realistic, I'm not sure there's a difference anymore." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Tank said something similar when he was teaching me surveillance techniques last week. He said most people go through life assuming everyone else shares their moral boundaries, and that makes them vulnerable to people who don't have any boundaries at all. Tank's right. Your biological mother was one of those people without boundaries. She was willing to murder both of us for money. That's not something you can negotiate with or rehabilitate or forgive your way out of." Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled. "Tank wants to know if I'm ready for advanced firearms training next weekend. He thinks I should learn long-range shooting in case I ever need to solve problems from a distance." The casual way Emma discussed learning sniper techniques should have been alarming. Instead, Vince felt pride at how thoroughly she'd embraced the reality of their world. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it's a useful skill to have," Emma replied pragmatically. "You never know when you might need to protect your family from people who won't listen to reason." As they finished their hot chocolate and Emma returned to her science project, Vince reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a bitter divorcee planning to spend his life alone. Now he was the father of a brilliant, dangerous young woman who shared his understanding that sometimes love meant being willing to do terrible things to protect the people who mattered. Emma looked up from her work with a question that had been bothering her. Vince, do you think there are other people out there like Lisa? People who would hurt kids for money or try to manipulate families for their own benefit? Unfortunately, yes. There are always predators looking for vulnerable targets. Emma nodded seriously. Then maybe when I'm older, we could work together. You could handle the investigation and planning, and I could handle the more direct problem solving. The suggestion that they could become a family business focused on eliminating threats to innocent people was offered with the same tone most children use to suggest weekend activities. That's something we could discuss when you're older, Vince said carefully, after you've had more training and experience. Emma smiled with satisfaction. I'd like that. I think we'd be good at protecting people who can't protect themselves. As Vince tucked Emma into bed that night, he realized that Lisa's greatest failure hadn't been the murder plot or the betrayal or even the willingness to sacrifice her own daughter for money. Her greatest failure had been underestimating the person Emma would become when raised by someone who actually loved and protected her. Lisa had created her own nemesis by threatening the one person Vince Cain cared about most in the world. And that nemesis had grown up to be someone even more ruthless and calculating than he was. In trying to destroy his family, Lisa had created the very weapon that ensured her own destruction. Good night, Dad, Emma said sleepily. Good night, kiddo. Sweet dreams. As Vince turned off the lights and closed Emma's door, he smiled with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Lisa Hartwell was gone, Emma was safe and thriving, and their family was secure. And if anyone else ever threatened the people he loved, they would discover that Vincent Cain had trained his daughter very, very well. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.